So, James, I have to admit, while I thought that tariffs were old news, it seems that they are still generating a lot of turbulence in the international economy.
They are generating a lot of turbulence. The whole I think we can safely say, Geordie, the international liberal rules-based trading system that has been built up specifically since the early 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, is really starting to come apart at the seams. So obviously we've had the big man himself, Donald Trump. One of his massive election promises was to start implementing tariffs.
Yes.
For anyone that doesn't know, we've covered this before. You can correct me as being the resident economic expert, you can correct me. But however, a tariff is essentially an import duty paid by the consumer. So if we import something from a country and we've placed tariffs on that country, for example, then the consumer will have to pay X amount more for that particular good or service.
So whoever's importing it pays the levy.
Yes.
And if the business is importing it, usually, most of the time, they will pass the levy, onto the consumer.
The consumer, correct. So, he's been going pretty wild with all this. So as of a couple weeks ago, he seems to have started, this is kind of my take on it, he seems to have, to a certain extent, essentially just initiated a trade war with the entire world.
Yes, he's weaponized trade.
And I will say, look, in defense of the United States, they retain the global top spot in nominal GDP.
Yep.
So about 30 trillion in nominal GDP, not in purchasing power parity, but just in GDP terms. And the only real sector that they lead the world in is the ability to wage war. Militarily, kinetic conflicts, but now also trade war.
Yes.
So the application of the tariff policy by Donald Trump is pretty schizophrenic. He essentially announced a 10% blanket ban across all countries, and he signed into place a new tariff regime that has placed tariffs on over 90 countries. Right?
Yep.
Now, I'm going to just come out here and say I don't think his intention for doing this is to revive the American manufacturing sector.
No, this is not industrial policy.
This is not industrial policy. As he said, and obviously you think the basic economic logic is, well, if it's more expensive to purchase goods from overseas, then it's going to incentivize the production of those goods on the home front, therefore bringing jobs back. And I'm sure there are certain circumstances where that is happening and that is working. I'm sure in some industries, in some areas, with some products, I'm sure that is a byproduct of this sanctions policy.
Especially targeted tariffs do work in some areas, especially in areas that are sensitive for national security.
Of course.
For sure, definitely. We learned that in the pandemic. Mm-hmm. We should probably be producing our own
masks, hand
sanitizers,
yes. A big one.
Our own medicines, things like that. Should be produced in their own country. However, I would argue that not every country needs to produce everything. That is illogical and pretty irrational. In my opinion.
Irrational. Yep. Yes. So look, the two most heavily sanctioned countries on the list are Brazil and India, both at a blanket 50% tariff. Oh, so not blanket, but 50% tariffs for US destined imports.
Yep. And China's up there as well.
Not as high, because that would be quite damaging to the US economy.
Well, at one point, the tariffs went up to, I think, 134%.
Yep.
And they went back and forth until they sat down, and I think they negotiated a 45% tariff.
Correct. So since the ousting of ex-Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, the US has made no secret of its animosity towards the current Brazilian government led by Lula Ignacio da Silva. However, the tariffs against India have been met by shock by Narendra Modi, head of the BJP party, and the current Indian leadership.
James,
yes.
Why is America placing trade sanctions on India? Do they import lots of stuff from India, or?
Well, so they actually do, Geordie. They have a so in 2024, bilateral trade between the US and India stood at $212 billion, with a $46 billion surplus in India's favour. And they've even recently been in talks to increase economic ties between the two countries.
Yes.
And Modi has said that, by within the next 5 years, we're going to have $500 billion in trade. Now, the reason he has said where he's doing this, the reason that they are putting forwards is that India has continued to buy Russian fossil fuels,
Yes.
which are sanctioned. However, so in an effort to try and isolate Russia, the US started sanctioning Russia and Russian energy. This has led to the catastrophic deindustrialization of Europe, of Germany, for example.
And I'll just add that it didn't work because China and India just bought all the Russian oil and gas.
Of course. Now, look, if you're Narendra Modi, India isn't what we'd call a fossil fuel superpower.
No.
No. They need to import their energy.
And if they want to develop their economy, they're going to have to import a lot more.
And they have 1.4 billion people.
Yes.
These people need energy.
Yep.
So the Indians have been buying Russian fossil fuel the entire time. Not only that, but under the Biden administration, India was asked to keep buying Russian oil.
All right.
Because the Biden administration was quite unpopular, with just as we all know. However, they were worried about the effects that limiting Russian oil and fossil fuels into the market would have on the domestic consumer back home.
Of course.
So they and I've heard this from a few different sources now. They were saying to the Indians, look, keep buying your fuel,
of course,
from Russia.
Yep.
And then the Indians have actually been making money because they've been on-selling it to other countries like Europe. Hilarious.
So hang on a sec. So the West sanctions Russian oil and gas.
Yes.
India buys the oil and gas.
Yep.
Repackages it, puts it on a boat.
Yeah.
Puts a profit on it, and then sells it to the West.
Yes, correct. To Europe.
Hilarious.
What a strategy.
Yeah.
Amazing. The US also did the same thing. They've been selling their liquefied natural gas to Europe, 400% markup. This is after they definitely didn't destroy the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Germany and Russia. Also hilarious. This whole thing I find is quite amusing because you start looking at it and you just think, what on earth is going on?
There's a lot of scheming going on.
There's a lot of scheming. There's just very little consistency. But look, India has played a very clever diplomatic game since 2022 because they've refused to take a public stand against Russia, but they've also kept the US on side by positioning themselves as a geopolitical counterweight to China.
Yep.
So they've been currying favour from both sides. They're also a member of the BRICS. So they are kind of, they're right in the middle and they're playing kind of both sides against each other. Just look, smart geopolitics, in my opinion. I don't agree with Narendra Modi's domestic policies. I reckon they're absolutely abhorrent. However, he and his diplomatic corps are playing a very smart game.
Very cunning.
Very cunning. And they are, at the end of the day, looking after the national interests of India as a country. And it's funny because, for example, the US has been looking towards India as a potential manufacturing hub. There's been US investment in India. So Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has stated that his goal is to have all US-sold iPhones produced in India. However, they'll still have their factories in China that they sell to other markets. But in an effect to decouple from China, Tim Cook has essentially said, now we want to start investing in manufacturing in India. So Apple has a US market cap of $3.16 trillion. So if in nominal GDP terms, that they'd be the 8th largest economy in the world.
Yep.
And it demonstrates the stupidity, in my opinion, of trying to implement these policies such as these in a world so interconnected and independent on global trade.
James, I just want to jump in there because you mentioned Tim Cook, isn't it, the CEO?
Yes.
Of Apple?
Yes.
So what happened while we're talking about trade policy?
Please.
I'm not sure if you have this in your notes here, but Trump, that he threatened Apple with a massive tariff on their iPhones that weren't going to be made, I think, in India it was. Regardless, anyway, he was going to put a tariff on the iPhones if they weren't manufactured in some certain area or had some specific relation that he wanted. And so he threatened Apple with this. And so what did Apple do? Capitulated, agreed, and Tim Cook went to the White House and gifted Trump a golden-plated, glass backing of an iPhone.
Good man. He knelt down and had to kiss the ring.
He did. No, he really did.
Kiss the ring.
And this kind of ties into your argument, and this is what Trump is doing, and the Republican administration is they are using these tariffs as leverage.
Yes. Absolutely.
To get what they want.
And that's the point that I'm gonna come back to here, because look, they did the same thing to Brazil. Right, so their harsh stance on Brazil has been, again, in reactions to the Brazilian government's persecution of Bolsonaro. Look,
and Bolsonaro being the former president,
the former president, who did try to organise a military coup d'état.
Yes.
So, look, logically, the Brazilian government, have started prosecuting him for trying to organise a military takeover of the country in the election that he just lost.
And Trump whacked them with tariffs for it.
They have also restricted US tech firms like X because, again, X... there's an ideological alignment between these actors like Elon Musk, between Trump, between Bolsonaro, and the Brazilian, their highest court. I think it's the Brazilian Supreme Court. They actually said that, look, they decreed that it was legal that because X had been a tool that had been used to try and organise this coup d'etat, that it was essentially, breaching Brazil's sovereignty.
Fair enough.
I've got no issue with that. And therefore have started restricting X usage in Brazil, which is quite funny as well because lots of the kind of the right-wing kind of tech bro media in the West has said like, oh, look, Brazil's a communist country. They're stopping our entrepreneurs. The judge that made that ruling was actually appointed by Bolsonaro himself.
So just upholding the laws of the nation.
Yes, literally. Yeah, but it's so, and that is why the thrust of my point that I'm trying to make overall is that he's using tariffs in a similar way in which they would use sanctions. So if they want concessions with a country, if they want to negotiate their position or have an upper hand, being, still in GDP terms, the biggest economy, they have a lot of power over other smaller economies. Like it hasn't stopped, but this hasn't, the damage levied by by these tariffs on other nations are like pretty severe. So you've got nations in Southeast Asia like Myanmar, Laos, and Vietnam. They've taken economic damage. Even Switzerland hasn't escaped unscathed. Tariffs on US exports sitting at 35%. So I guess Trump will defend that by saying the Americans are trying to revive their dying cuckoo clock manufacturing industry and their Gouda cheese industry by sanctioning Switzerland. But like you said, Geordie, it seems to be they put down this, and this seems to be Trump's tactic. You just go balls to the wall, all out the most extreme position. The country on the other end comes forward desperate to negotiate, and then they capitulate on other terms, and then you remove the tariffs, partially at least.
While we're talking about disruption in trade, I heard the other day that Australia's exports to the US, the volume of exports, since he announced the tariffs, the blanket 10% tariff on Australia, has reduced by 34%.
Wow. So they do have an impact.
They're having a massive effect on Australian exporters.
They do have an impact.
And I'll give you some anecdotal evidence, an anecdotal story here. I was speaking to someone just the other week who imports steel and other commodities from Vietnam. And what they're doing to get around the tariffs, though, is they're importing it from Vietnam, bringing it into Australia, repackaging it as an Australian good, and then selling it to the US to get past the tariffs. So it is a leaky system. I think it's important to point that out.
As the people that probably supported Trump would say, the market always finds a way.
It does. It does.
It does. It really, really does. So I think that this will actually have a detrimental effect on the geopolitical standing of the United States. You can tell me if you agree or not, because I feel like if nations are limited in their export capacity to the United States, then they're going to look for other alternatives.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so that will strengthen these alliances like BRICS. This will strengthen the nations like China that are the supposed, the US is supposedly trying to isolate them.
Yes, James, for sure.
Yeah.
It illustrates the massive contradiction of the rest of the world trying to move past the dollar to trade in their own currencies and trade with each other. And at the same time, the US trying to stop that happening by using tariffs against these countries as leverage, which then speeds up the process of de-dollarization.
Yes, of course. So it's this Ouroboros, this never-ending loop.
That's exactly right.
And it just keeps picking up speed. So like, and I'm assuming with the India thing, again, it's punishment for, for buying Russian oil. What are the Indians going to do? Just run out of fuel? Yeah. Like, again, it's completely nonsensical. Yeah.
Shows how desperate the US is, man. If they can't go in with their military and put a gun to your head, this is what they're going to do.
Absolutely. But again, and how do you think the Indians are going? The Indians have been very diplomatic and always been, at least rhetorically, on the same side as the US. So this is going to push them further and further away from the United States.
Yeah.
Another consequence of the tariffs, I think, and these are the two reasons why I think they've been implemented in such a way. Obviously, one, you can get economic and political concessions out of countries that you're implementing tariffs on. The second one is to increase tax revenues.
Yes, that's exactly
for the United States
this was
government.
The point I was going to make.
Yes, correct. So apparently, since January 2025, it's estimated the government has raked in over $70 billion in extra tax revenue just via tariffs.
I think it's more than that. I saw 130.
So I've seen a couple different figures, so I decided to go for the conservative option.
And what did we talk about when this was happening, James? That this would pay for the Republicans' continuing tax cuts, didn't we?
Absolutely, Geordie. And at the same time, they know the working class in the US is taxed out the bumhole.
And James, who's paying for this tax cut on the tariffs?
Working class Americans.
That's exactly right.
Amazing, a country that the founding moment of its independence was because it didn't want to pay taxes.
Yeah. And this is why I do give it to Trump and his administration. It is incredible that they have been able to convince their working base that tariffs are, one, paid by the country that the tariff's being put on, and that, two, these tariffs would bring jobs back to America. Because
it's amazing.
If you look at a lot of the countries that they're putting tariffs on, like Vietnam and China, if you look at these types of industries that are going to be affected coming back to the US, they're largely industries that are going to have robots and AI take over in the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's just absolutely fascinating. So you're going to have, if these industries do follow back to the US at some point in the future, they're not going to create jobs. They're just going to have robots manufacturing this stuff.
Absolutely. It's completely like, from the outside, if you're just like an innocent observer, you're going to think, I think this dude's schizophrenic. Like, I cannot make a rhyme or reason, heads or tails of it.
It's really fascinating that he's been able to sell this highly irrational policy.
It's amazing.
To his supporter base, and they buy into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
They really do. And it does show how desperate I think a lot of people are.
Absolutely. But in the US as well, like, again, there's such that strong movement of, like, the libertarian, don't tread on me, no taxes. That's such a part of their culture.
Yes.
Yet just hook, line and sinker.
Well, because, James, the other country's paying the tax. We're not paying the import levy. They're paying for it. It's great, and it brings jobs back to the US.
Oh, dude, and this is why I don't really like Donald Trump, but people that say he's stupid.
He's Machiavellian.
I think he's a very intelligent man. I think he's an asshole, personally. Don't sue me, please. But he's incredibly intelligent.
I'm not sure if intelligence is the right word. I'd say Machiavellian. He knows how to use business.
And he knows which way the wind's blowing.
He does.
He knows which way the wind's blowing.
Which in some ways does show intelligence in that field.
Of course.
Look,
but so that's what's been happening. How he's going to hold this up? Like, will this just become the new norm? And it shows, like we're saying, the again, part of the main thrust of what I'm trying to say is that this will have counterintuitive effects.
Yeah.
On America's standing at the end of the day. And the American people are going to be more pissed off. But hey, like you said, they need to pay for that $4 trillion in tax cuts, and they've increased their military budget, they need to increase their military standing, and they need money to do that. So maybe that is some revealing information in case anyone was a bit confused.
No, it is. It's very fascinating. This will continue to unfold, and we will keep seeing this tariff policy being weaponized to get what the hegemon wants.
Yep, and it'll be interesting when, at what point will the hegemon, by fault of its own actions, cease being the hegemon?
Yeah, I think it'll be a very slow process, but we are seeing this unfold in real time right now.
And when it happens, we'll be here at Left Hook Media. We'll be talking about it.
All right, James, thank you. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Like, comment, and subscribe, everyone.
Thanks, guys. See
you next time.